You're listening to the Bloodshed Baddies. Hi, I'm Lex.
And I'm Sam.
And I'm Pagan.
And we are the Bloodshed Baddies.
Woo!
Baddies, we are so excited. We have a guest here with us today. We have Miss Pagan Kennedy. Pagan has an awesome background. She was actually a pioneer of the 1990s zine movement. She is a contributing writer to the New York Times Sunday Review and a columnist for the New York Times Magazine. She has written 10 books in different genres. She is the recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in Fiction, a Sonora Review Fiction Prize, and a Smithsonian Fellowship for Science Writing. Her 11th and newest book was released this year, The Secret History of a Rape Kit. Pagan, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got where you are today?
Sure. Actually, I think Wikipedia isn't correct about a lot of those things. I mean, they're true, but they're kind of out of date. I'm not working. I did work for the New York Times for a long time in different sections of the paper. And I haven't written fiction in a bazillion years. I'm old, so I've done a lot of things. I became really a science journalist about 15 years ago and really focused in on I'm really interested in the politics of invention and design. So, that, and for about 2 years, I was what I called the who made that guy at the New York Times, where they would give me an object and I'd have to find the person who first conceived of it and write a story about it. And that was a really good education in how things get invented, how they come to be. So,
That's so fun.
yeah,
That sounds really cool.
It was pretty exhausting to tell you the truth, but it was a great gig.
Awesome. So, your book, The Secret History of a Rape Kit, follows the story of Martha Goddard. And in 1972, she volunteered for a crisis hotline counseling girls who had been molested by their fathers, their teachers, their uncles. Soon, Martha was on a mission to answer the question, why were so many sexual predators getting away with these crimes? By the end of the decade, she launched a campaign pushing hospitals and police departments to collect evidence of sexual assault and treat survivors with dignity. She designed a new kind of forensics tool, the rape kit, and new practices around evidence collection that spread across the country. Yet, even as Marty fought for women's rights, she allowed a man to take credit for her work. So tell us more about what inspired you to write this book.
Well, I wasn't really thinking of it as a book in the beginning. In 2018-ish, I was just, as I said, my framework is very much thinking about invention and design, and especially the power dynamics of that. So, when anything is created, there are winners and losers. There's a kind of statement about who's important in that thing. What matters? What are we doing here? Is in that design, is baked in a way that it's sometimes really hard to see. And so anyway, I was thinking about that, and I was really asking myself the question, what things have been created by and for women? What does it look like? Because, the power to create things, to design things has been very much restricted to the people who already have power.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot in the book about that and why that is and how that happened. But I was thinking, well, if you give people who've experienced sexism or who have, deal with women's health issues or whatever, all the particular things that and again, trans women, non-binary too, I throw in there, as of course, as people I'm thinking about in terms of what this kind of design would look like. And so anyway, I was thinking about this, and there's some interesting inventions like the sports bra and stuff that have really not received enough attention, but suddenly my attention landed on the rape kit or the sexual assault examination kit. because it's one of those objects that everybody's heard of, but people, often it's sort of invisible. It's sort of hidden in plain sight. And in fact, when I do interviews, like usually the first question is, what is a rape kit? Which is kind of crazy because it's this national system of evidence, but people know very little about it. So anyway, I went looking so I, again, with my framework of being the who made that guy, I was like, I was really curious, how did this thing come into existence? Because, in theory, we have this system where a survivor would be able to go into any hospital and receive a very scientific and complete examination by ideally a forensic nurse. And then the kit would be banked and held in police warehouses. And then, the DNA results go to the FBI, and those can all it's really an incredible achievement because not only does this allow you to see the path of a serial predator that would be very hard to see without it, because, if 3 kits show the same DNA of the same predator, they might be in all different states, but now, you would have never seen that these cases were connected. And obviously, kind of in a world where sexual assault is really not taken seriously and often treated as an unsolvable crime. It's, the sort of thing is often said, it's always a he said, she said, and you really can't figure it out. Well, if you have 3 kits with the same DNA, that's pretty clear what happened. At the same time, it's really because we have such a terrible history in this country of Black and brown men being falsely accused or framed for sexual assault. The DNA in that kit is really, really important for exonerating innocent people and just getting it right, making it much more probable that you're going to actually find the person who actually did this thing. And anyway, so I thought this is kind of miraculous, and we never really talk about it. Obviously the reality falls short a lot. But anyway, so at the time on 2018, I looked on Wikipedia and it said that the sole inventor was a police officer in Chicago named Louis Vitullo. Vitullo was involved in the development of the kit, and he definitely deserves credit for that. But that is not correct. That story is not correct for a whole list of reasons I could go into. Anyway, at the time, I knew none of this, so I really just wanted to talk to Vitullo, but he had passed away many years before. So I went looking for other people who might have been involved in the development of the kit. And I kept seeing this name, Martha Goddard or Marty Goddard, and she was described as kind of Vitullo's helper or whatever. And I thought she might be alive. And a lot of the book is me looking for her because she had just completely disappeared when I started this. And there was just I had a job hunting down obscure inventors, and I could not find anything. It was crazy how just invisible she was. So that kind of launched me on this search to find out what happened. And I gradually, by finding a lot of newspaper articles I dug up and a lot of some archival interviews with her, as well as tracking down a lot of people she worked with, and eventually her family members, I was able to reconstruct the whole story really from her point of view and from the point of view of, frankly, the other women who were very, very crucial in developing this new system. So I've talked for a long time and I haven't even gotten to the story, but the story is really amazing. And what you have to understand is in the early 70s, Part of what I tried to do in the book is just take you back to the early 70s so you understand how bad things were. And, unfortunately, we're kind of going back there in a number of ways. But at the time, marital rape was legal all across the United States, which meant that essentially the legal definition in marriage was that the wife's body was like the property of the husband. So whatever
Oh,
he did, short of violent, some kind of, I guess murder was illegal, but it was really not really based on these very old laws that had been around for hundreds of years that the wife belongs to her husband. And that really hadn't changed much. But, it's just so disturbing to see the police handbooks of the time saying that almost all women who accuse rape are just liars. And, so there was a very rudimentary system for collecting evidence of sexual assault, but mainly the police didn't because the idea was you couldn't trust what the survivor said. So, and it was the police officer had the power to just say, this is all a lie, or this person's not trustworthy, so we're not going to go forward at all. We're not going to collect any evidence. And so Marty Goddard came along at that time, and she fought not only to change that culture, but she was put on a task force in Chicago that gave her the power to talk to people in the hospitals and the crime labs and the police departments and really begin to dig into when they actually did collect evidence, why were they doing such a terrible job of it? And so that led her to, and the other thing that was incorrect that I found was there were sort of some rape kits here and there around the country, little like experiments with them, or it was not like a system at all. It was just like here and there might be. And they were like pretty terrible generally. The few that existed might be like I found the instructions to one and it said, if she's like a slutty prostitute, you don't need
Oh my
to.
gosh.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so it was the same kind of language was in the kits as in these training manuals and in the whole attitude. But I think she recognized that by creating this kit that in a scientific manner where it has really clear instructions and the tools and you train the nurses and you train the crime lab and everybody's on the same page and mostly creating this new norm that any survivor has the right to report and file evidence and that the police officer isn't allowed to just say she's a liar, we're not doing this, and making the point people be more the hospital staff and the nurses who are not going to question their survivors. So that was, so crucial was just creating the system. But she literally like raised all the money to make the kits and
wow.
manufactured them and was going into all the hospitals, was training everybody. She was just like making it all happen. And as you mentioned, it ended up becoming called the Vitulo kit. And that was actually, as far as I've been able to trace back, because I found the trademark on the kit, she was the one who trademarked it under that name.
Mm.
And I think that tells you something about that. I can't know exactly what she was thinking, but it was pretty clear. And then talking to a couple of people who worked with her, they were pretty clear on it was a good idea to name it after a police officer
Yeah.
because they really wanted buy-in. It was going to be really hard to get the police department to go on board with this. So that was part of it. If you think about it, why would you need to name this thing after any person? Like it doesn't need to be named. And it
Yes.
isn't now, the official name now is the sexual assault examination kit. It's not named after a person now. So that seems to me to be a political move she felt she had to make at that time.
Which is
Wow.
awful.
That's, I mean, this story has so many different parts in play. I think
Yes.
what was most surprising to me is being from the true crime world, we hear about rape kits all the time.
Yeah.
And I just don't think I realized that it wasn't until the 70s that this was even something that was thought about.
Neither did I.
Yeah.
It seems like we should have been doing this long before.
Yep.
Well, there was really an attitude that, again, that, I mean, unfortunately, this attitude persists, but that the woman who accused, and it, of course, in the 1980s, there became much more awareness that there were male victims of sexual assault, and that, they raised their voices and really started a movement. But there was just no awareness of that really before the 80s. But there was just a long history of testing the women who accused somebody of rape, testing their virginity, examining physical examinations to see if what their sexual history was. And unfortunately, there's ways in which that kind of persists. Sometimes it's very hard to root out. But yeah, it's nice that it's all of this was created before the existence of or the invention of DNA identification. And that happened in the 1980s and was really a thing by the 1990s. So once you had the DNA, that really did make this, well, first of all, it was amazing because there were already all these kits banked across the country, thousands and thousands. So now you can test, you see if they have DNA in them and test them, which makes them so much more powerful.
Yes.
But it really made it a much more of, help to focus in on the scientific sort of evidence. It made it, what I would like to say is like, the early system was not an evidence-based evidence system, because if you're going to say that most people are liars and you refuse to collect their evidence, that's not looking at evidence. That's just how you feel about the accuser and prejudging people. So it's really wonderful to see when it can work to really look at the physical evidence and be able to use that to really try to get it right and find out really who is especially a serial predator. And the kits also allow researchers to even study the patterns of sexual assault. Because if you can imagine, you can look at data from thousands of kits and begin to see how many serial predators are there. Well, it turns out there are a lot more than we thought when you really look at the data. And the way the crimes happen are kind of different than there. For instance, this idea that there's a stranger rape and that there's acquaintance rape, that's when you actually look at the data, it's clear that, and this is so common sense, that somebody who's a domestic abuser is much more likely to also be attacking people he doesn't know. So,
Wow. And I know today, like as great as all this is and stuff, I know today we still are having issues with so much backlog of rape kits.
Actually, I would say I've been so lucky to work with and the backlog and do speaking when I talk about the book. Sometimes and the backlog will be there and also talk. And that's been great. And I think it's really important to say that the backlog at its peak was almost 500,000. It was about 400,000. Yeah.
Wow.
And now, because of all these groups and, because so much awareness has been raised, because of survivor groups, because of the kind of federal and state funding that honestly we're not going to get anymore for a long time, it's being cut. But because of all of this effort and activism, that backlog is down to about 50,000.
Oh, wow.
So I think it's really important makes me sad that people don't know that, because I think it's very important that people should know that we can solve problems if we work and we raise a fuss and we work hard, and we come together around an issue. Like, we actually can make huge change. But there's a lot of other problems in the system, which I write about in the book, that we still need to work on.
Yeah, that's just like an amazing amazing data on how your voice does matter and
Yes.
you can affect change. And like, I'm so glad that you did write this book and that there are these great organizations who are bringing awareness to it. Because that's incredible numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so impressive. I mean, honestly, it's probably not going to get much lower than that because just chasing around after every police department and, and funding issues of blah, 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 you're never going to be perfect. But that is really, really, it's a huge win. And it shows that, and it shows the power of, because a lot of people, a lot of survivors came out and talked about how their kits were not tested. And that had a big impact. Like you guys, everybody knows about the backlog. So we just need to spread the news that, like, I wouldn't say it's solved, but we've had a huge win there.
Yes. That
Yeah,
is
I
so
think,
incredible.
yeah, when you hear the number 50,000 at first, you're like, that's huge. But then when you explain it to where it was at this number, that's a lot better at like, wow, that's incredible. Like change can happen.
Yeah, and out of that, 350,000, they've solved a whole bunch of cold cases. They've, obviously it's been really useful exonerations. And again, like I mentioned, the data, these researchers now have this like flood of data they can look at to see exactly what the patterns are and who is the most likely to be a serial predator, questions like that are really fascinating.
And so
That's
important.
Yeah.
yes. If you could talk to Martha Goddard, what is like one question you would have to ask her?
I mean, I would just want to hear the full. I managed to find these rather obscure oral histories where she did tell her story, but I just would want to just sit her down and tell the whole story because I've had to I got a lot from that and a lot from all the other sources I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But I just would want to hear the story from start to finish because there's so many just pieces of it. And I would like to know, I mean, this is something she wouldn't have been able to explain, I think, but why she did disappear. She was very famous in Chicago and a real power broker. And then she just kind of fell off the map to the point where when I was interviewing people who worked with her in the 70s, they were like, I really want to talk to her. Like, if you find her, and tell me. They had not, these people who were really close to her.
Wow.
That's
So,
wild.
and I have a lot of accounts of her kind of trajectory and how she started to flame out. But yeah, I mean, there's just so much more. I would just want her to fill in all those pieces of her life I couldn't quite fully, see.
Yes. What is one thing that you want our listeners and the readers of your book to really take away from your book?
So what I wanted you to take away, one of the I would say the biggest problem we have now is access to the kit. So, I mean, I mentioned that the norm what is supposed to be that you could go, that this would be accessible for everybody. And the reality is not very many hospitals actually have the kits or offer the forensic exam. There are not enough forensic nurses. There's huge rural areas where, well, like you really have to have a car to get this, unless you live in a very big city. And you guys know emergency, you have to go to an emergency room usually. I mean, different states have different rules. And that can take like 8 hours just waiting. And then the forensic exam itself is very thorough. It can take up to 5 hours. And then you might
Wow.
have to talk to a police officer. So you would, you would be doing this extremely traumatic process for 20, you could be, just doing this for a day or two straight. And that is not accessible. Like people don't have cars, people don't have childcare, they don't have the kind of jobs that allow for that, or they're just not able, it's too traumatic. So that's I'm doing a talk tomorrow with the Cooper Hewitt Museum, and they're going to have this amazing woman who was involved in the creation of the Safe Star program, which is on indigenous lands. And they really have rethought the rape kit as for the way it would work inside indigenous lands. And they've managed to actually get sign off from forensic nursing groups and the FBI for this to be legal, which is really hard because it's very hard to make change in this area. But they managed to do it. And they have a whole different system where kind of the elders, you can get trained. It doesn't take a super long time to get trained to do a forensic exam. Honestly, it's not that complicated. So I wish this system were everywhere. And the kind of people that you would want to go to in a traumatic experience, are trained, the elders or trusted people in the community, and that have actually native medicines or medicines that are important to people in that specific location or inside the kit. It's very much designed by the community around not just how can we scientifically collect evidence in a way that's really rigorous, but what do our survivors need and how do they want to tell their story? And that's, I would love to see that everywhere. We're really, really far from that right now. But I'm just so inspired by that. And I think, there's also just huge potential. We have phones, we have telehealth, we have all kinds of digital tools now that might make this, again, completely rigorous and not, really great way of collecting evidence that could be so much less traumatic and more accessible. Now, exactly how that works, that's not for me to say. I think that would be I would love to see survivor groups come together and be at the forefront of the design. And, they could work, working with experts, obviously, but I think it should be survivors who are allowed to have a big say in how this is designed. I mean, so
that's so incredible. I love that they're using trusted people in their communities.
Yes.
Because I think it is scary to go to a doctor that you've never met before. You don't know what they're going to feel, their opinions. Like, as great as it is that we've come further than the 70s, like, there's still people out there that hold the opinions that, like, oh, she said it, but who knows if it's true.
Right.
And there's so much, I think, variables in it, like you said, that I think it would be perfect to do survivor led. I love that idea.
Yeah, it's hard because, I'm talking to a lot of forensic nurses now, and all kinds of funding is being cut just from what we do have, the systems we do have. And they're, wonderful, heroic people who are just hanging on the best they can and trying to serve the communities. But yeah, I think it's like the backlog problem. If people look at it, get involved, see it, what we were talking about, how the rape kit is this kind of weirdly invisible object. And so one of my goals with doing the book and then talking about it is just to have people know what it is and how it is supposed to work, how it fails, how it should work, how it could work, and then imagine, and then feel empowered to say, hey, it could work this other way that would be a lot better, or this is how I would want it to be. And so yeah, that would be great. I mean, I know there's a lot going on right now, and this is just one of the things. So it's a little hard to, but this is, I think Marty Goddard is such a great example of somebody who got in the weeds, solved problems. You kind of have to choose your battles of what things can be solved and what can't. And I think this is one thing that actually completely could be solved if we threw ourselves at it.
I totally agree. And I love that. So where can our listeners buy your book?
It's from, it's a Random House Penguin, Vintage, whatever book. So it's, bookstores, online, Amazon. Well, I guess you're supposed to not, I don't know, buy from the independent bookstores online or, yeah, it should be pretty available. And the audiobook is narrated by Claire Danes. So she
Oh,
does an
cool.
amazing job. So I would really recommend that.
Very cool.
That's
We will definitely
great.
link all of that in our show notes for
Yeah.
you listeners.
Yeah. And where can our listeners find you on social media?
I am the only Pagan Kennedy on the internet, so it's pretty
That's
easy.
awesome.
Woo! Just search her up, guys.
Yeah.
Okay, Baddies, thank you so much for listening. Pagan, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this super important issue. I feel like inspired to make change now.
I do too. It was incredible. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much, Pagan, for joining. Hopefully, you baddies will get her book. She is a baddie. She is incredible. And Martha is also incredible. So get that book and read it. We will link all of her below in the socials. Thank you so much for listening.
Tune in next week.
Don't forget to follow us on our socials too, baddies. Love you.
Bye.